So now I'll import pandas as PD, then import PyMySQL. Then from SQL Alchemy, import create. So that's create engine. So let's run that cell. All right. So now I'll load in the clean data, right? Using pd.read CSV. Then just specify universities clean.csv. All right, so we're able to load that without any issues. So I'll type df. The first thing we need to do now regarding the database is to create a connection object, right? That will be using PyMySQL.connect. So we need to specify the host, right? So that's going to be localhost. So this is very similar to what we did with the VS Code extension right here. So this can be localhost or 127.0.0.1. All right, so let's run that and hopefully we don't have any issues, right? So that was able to connect successfully, right? So now what I'm going to do is to create a cursor object as well. So that's actually what we'll now use in interacting with the database. So that's going to be con.cursor. And let's run that. So we don't have any issue with that as well. Right, so let's run a query using this cursor. And to run a query, we can use cursor.execute or cursor.execute many. Right, so usually you use execute many if you are running the query against, a list of values or a list of items. Right, so for cursor.execute, I'll type select, or let's show databases. Right, so I'll run this and no error with that. Then to fetch the results, right, the results of show databases, we'll type cursor.fetch all, and that basically lists all the databases, right? But currently this VS Code extension is showing us only the DB, right? The one that was specified when we're creating the Docker container, right? But these other databases are system databases, and I guess that's why the extension is not showing those databases, right? But basically, you can see we're able to list all the databases, and if we type tables instead, right, then run cursor.fetch all, you see that we get an empty tuple, right? So this show tables is running within the DB database, since that's the database we specified here, right? All right, so now that we know the cursor object is working and we're able to connect to the database, now we can actually try to create a table, right? That's the table where we load the data into. So what I'll just do is create a folder, call it SQL, just to put all the SQL files, right? So here I'll just type my SQL underscore creates underscore table, or okay, yeah, that's fine. So .sql, right? So I'll type my query here, my create table query, and let's just call that table university. Right, so I would like the table to have an ID and give it a data type of big int. Then also auto increments. And of course, it shouldn't be null. So it should not be nullable, right? So that's the first column. The second column is going to be country. And country, that will be of data type varchar. It shouldn't be nullable as well, right? So we also have a university. Let me just, so we'll leave this as name, right? And let's see. seems name is a reserved word, right? And you can ignore all the red lines under some of these texts, right? So for the name, varchar 255, and I also don't want the name to be null, right? So next we have founded. So I can just bring this, let's just open this down here, right? So we have founded, and that's going to be an integer, right? And it should also be not null. The type is going to be a string, so it's going to be varchar 255, then not null as well. Then we have the enrollments, which is the other string, other integer column. So I'll give that begins, not null. Then finally, we have the link, which will be varchar 255, not null. So now let's add a unique combination constraint, right? So I'm going to add unique key. Then just give this a name. Let's give it unique combination, right? So the two columns I'd like to give a unique combination constraint are the country column and the name column, right? So this unique combination constraints basically allows us to avoid having duplicates combination of the university name and the country, right? So it's very possible for us to have the same university names, but those universities actually are in different countries, right? So for example, we could have something like government university, right? Now, this government university is the university name, and we can have it in basically all the countries, right? We can have, that same name in all the countries or in more than one country, right? So that's why I need a unique combination so that we can't enter the same name of a university for the same country, right? But we can enter the same name for different countries, basically, right? So, and also I can specify my primary key, right? So my primary key is just the ID column, right? Which will auto increment, right? So that's everything we need to supply for the table creation, right? So I'll go back to the Python code. I think I can close this. Right, so what I want to do now is create a variable called as create query and use the open function to just open the SQL folder. And within that folder, I'm going to select the MySQL creatable SQL file. That's this file here, right? And by default, it's going to open in read mode. So I can just type create, that's create query. Does read, right? And you can see this is the same query we have within that file, right? So I'm just reading the contents of that SQL file. So in fact, I'll rename this to create query file, and the query itself will just be equal to the create query file dot read, right? So create query still gives us that SQL query, right? So now we want to run this query using our cursor objects. So if I go back to the database extension right here, you can see currently we have no tables, right? So I'll refresh this. Currently, no tables. Right, so what I'll do now is to run cursor.execute, then pass in the query, right, the create query. Then I'll run this. And there seems to be an error. Right, so let's just look through. Okay, so the error I can see here is I have ints and big ints, right? I think I'll just remove ints and leave that as big ints. And let's be sure we should only have one data type for each column, right? So I'll just go back to the Jupyter notebook, then run this cell again so that we can load the query. And in fact, let's note where the error is. So that's this portion right here. Right, so once I run this cell again, we should now have the correct value, right? So enrollments begins. Okay, so I run this cell, and that was actually successful. So let me refresh this table, and we can see now that there's a university table right here. So if I expand that, we can see all the columns, right? And we have this indicating the primary key, right? So now we've been able to create our table from within Python using the SQL query. Now, what we need to do is to load our data into the table we just created. We'll write our query in such a way that if a particular row already exists, right, using the unique combination that we defined in the create table query, right? So if a particular row already exists using that combination, then all we want to do is just maybe update some of the columns, right? Or we can also choose to do nothing, right? But if that row doesn't exist already, then we can go ahead to insert that row, basically, right? So the way we'll go about that is I'll just create a new cell here, then create a variable called that data, right? And so that's going to be df dot, so I'll use iter tuples, then specify index as none and the name as none. So I just want to get the data frame as a list of tuples or as a tuple of tuples, right? So if I just type tuple data, you can see I have the whole data frame as a list of tuples, basically, right? So we have the first item. So the order is actually quite important, right? So we need to note the order in which data frame has been created, right? So we have the country, the university, the year it was founded, the type of university, the enrollment, and the link, the Wikipedia link to that university or to the page for the university in Wikipedia, right? So I'm just going to run this again. All right, so now that we have the data as a list of tuples, right? What I'd like to do now is to write the merge query or the offset query, basically, right? So let's go back to the Explorer. So here I'll just create a new file called that MySQL offsets, then .sql, right? And to do an offset, all we need to do is just start things over. See, we are trying to insert data into the database, right? So that's going to be insert into then the name of the table, right? Then I'll specify the columns, right? So I'm entering the country. I'll just bring this right here. Oh, okay. So let's just take a look at the data frame. All right, so we have the country first, followed by the university name, right? So that's the name column. Then founded, then the type, All right, then the enrollment and the link, right? So we are inserting values, right? But we don't know what we're inserting yet, right? So we'll just place, placeholders for those values, right? So you have to specify as many placeholders as there are columns here. So I have country name founded, type enrollment link. So that's 6. So these placeholders will actually be used by Python, right? It's not something that's MySQL recognizes, but Python will just look for the placeholders, then replace them with the tuples that we just generated. All right. So those are the placeholders. Then the next thing I'm going to add is on duplicate key, right? So remember we have a unique combination, right? 2 columns serve as the key that we're trying to use in knowing if a row already exists, right? So if we detect a duplicate key, then we'd like to update, right? So this is the part where we actually update a particular row that exists in the table already, right? So I'll just, let's just update every other column, right? Every other column apart from the unique combination columns. So this will just, update the founded value by the value that would have been inserted if that row was not in the table, right? So we'll have founded, then type. So that's going to be equal to values type. Okay, then we have enrollments. That's going to be values, enrollments, and finally the link, right? That's going to be values, link. Then we close it off with a semicolon. Right, so now let's see if this actually works. Right, so I'll bring this back to this point. Okay. So let's see if we can fetch data from the table we created. Right, so we have this table with these columns, but we've not loaded any data. Right, so I can run pd.read SQL. And type select star from the table name is university, right? And then, so what I need to do now, I actually need to specify a connection object right here. But pandas will work with some other connection objects. So let's try con. But the recommended connection object for pandas is an object from SQL Alchemy engine. Right, so let's run this and see if it works. So it actually works, right? But you can see we have a warning here that says pandas only supports SQL Alchemy connectable. That's an engine or connection or a database string URI. And we also have something relating to SQLite, DB API, and all that. Right, so that's actually why we installed SQL Alchemy, right? So to just create that engine, since we already have a connection object, right? All we need to do is just type create engine, then MySQL, then the Python driver we are trying to use, which is PyMySQL, right? Then followed by colon and double slash. Then now we specify a creator parameter, and that's just going to be an anonymous function, which is lambda, then con, right? So that's how you specify an existing connection into the SQL Alchemy Create Engine function. And let's run that. So there's an error. All right, so there's a typo here. All right, so this should be pi MySQL, right? So I'll run this again, and that actually works, right? So I'm going to replace this with the engine, and you see that we won't have this warning anymore, right? But as you can see from here, the table is currently empty. So I'll just run that again, and you see that we don't have that warning. It still gives us the empty table results, right? So now let's load data into the database. So just like we did for the create table query, we'll do the same for the merge. So I'll type merge query file. We'll do the same for the merge query. I'll use the open function, then pass in the paths to the SQL file. So now I'll select the merge, the MySQL obsat path. So the merge query itself is just the merge query file. Just read, right? Just to read the contents. So I'll do that, and I'll just print the merge query here, and you can see we have the insert statement right here, and we have the placeholders, right? So once I load the tuples, that's the tuples from this part, each tuple would replace what we have here, the tuple with the placeholders here, right? And that's how we are actually able to load data from Python into the database, right? So you can see there's an error here. So this should be link. So I should change this to link, right? So let's just make sure the columns we have here are the same columns in the database, right? The same columns in the university table in the database. So I'll just run this again and look through. Okay, so this now says link, right? Okay, so that's our merge query, right? So now we're going to use, so let's see. So I'll just bring this here, right? So what I'll do is, I'll just make this a tuple, or you could make it a list, right? So it could be a list of tuples, or it could be a tuple of tuples. But let's just make it a list of tuples. So if I just type data here, you can see we have the list, and inside the list we have tuples, right? So I can delete this. I still have the data here, right? So what I'd like to do now is to load the data into the DB using cursor.execute many, right? Then I'm going to pass the query and also pass in the data that will be loaded. So execute many expects the query and the data that will be loaded into the database, right? So I'll run that, and there's an error, but let's debug that, right? So let's check the syntax. All right, so we need to have commas here, right? We need to have commas right there. So let's go back and let's just, okay, so currently there are no commas, but if I run this again, so now we have the commas, right? So those are the things you need to look out for, when writing the query. So I'll run this again, and we can see that it works this time. So one thing you just always need to do is whenever you run a query, we just try to commit the query, right? Right, so now this appears to have worked. So let's run pd.readsql again. I'll just copy this right here, then paste it. So remember the last time we ran that line of code, we had no results, right? So now I'll run this, And you can see we have some results, right? So this is now coming from the database, right? So I could open a terminal here. So using that same extension, if you click on this icon, it actually opens a terminal. Right, so I'm going to type use Amdari DB. Right, so I'll type show tables. So this is just connecting to the terminal or to the database using a terminal, right? It's just the same thing we've done here and also within the Jupyter notebook. So this is, we have just one table, right? So I'll type select star from university. And you can see we have the same table right here, right? So I'll just collapse this. You can see we have the same table and the type also has some extra, some of them have extra text apart from public or private, right? Which is actually fine. So we've been able to successfully load the scripts data into MySQL table, basically, right? But let's see if we run this query again. So if we run this again, we don't get any issues, right? We don't get any errors, and that's because if a row already exists, what we have done is to just update. So what we have done here is that if a row already exists and we get a duplicate key, then we just update the other columns, right? And to actually prove that we are able to update existing columns on duplicate key, I'm going to edit the university's clean.csv. So the first row, let's change that from a value of over 2 million to 20, for example. Then the second row, I'll change that to 1, right? Then let's go back to the Jupyter notebook, and you can see the first row is over 2 million, and the second row is about over 349,000, right? So if I run the query again, now I will expect to see a value of 20 for the first row. That's the Bangladesh row. Then for the Mexico row, I expect to see a value of 1, right? So let's run that and see if it works. And in order to do that, I need to read the CSV again, right? So what I'm going to do is, so I just get this line of code here, and yeah, just paste that before this line right here. Right, so I'm going to run everything starting from this cell and below. Right, so I'll select this option, then click on execute cell and below. Right, so you can see initially we had, this is what we have, right? But if I scroll down and go to the last line, we can see enrollment is now 20, and enrollment is now 20 for the Bangladesh row, and for the Mexico row, enrollment is now 1. And that's because we updated these values right here, right? So you can see that, when it's found the duplicates, instead of raising an error or, complaining about having duplicates, it basically just updated the values for the enrollment, right? So it's going to do the same for the link, for the type, and for the founded columns as well, right? So that way we can run the query multiple times and, we get the same results, right? So that's basically what is known as, idempotency, right? So every time we run the query, if nothing has changed, then we'll keep having the same results in the table, basically. Right, so that brings us to the end of this video. We've been able to demonstrate how to load the script data into MySQL database, right? So that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll take a look at how to load the same data in the same way using a Postgres database.